Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hey friends, happy to be here with you. I've been having fun lately with what I'm thinking of as kind of a series. One thing I've noticed about my brain, I think it's part of being highly sensitive, so maybe this will resonate with you too. But what I've found over the course of creating this podcast for you all is that it's more fun for me, more juicy for me to kind of have a collection of podcast episodes on a somewhat similar topic. So I can come at the overall topic from different angles and kind of give a broader, deeper, bigger perspective on it and help you out more deeply around certain issues. So this series that I've been doing here lately has really been about, ultimately what I'm thinking of as ushering in a revolution of sensitivity and love in our modern relationships. And really what that's entailing is how to become an empowered, highly sensitive woman in love who brings in more respect and understanding and all the good stuff into our marriage and from our partner. So some of that has to do with having boundaries and saying no and not doing all the things that are sweet and kind. So that's what I want to talk about today. You really can say no and still be an amazing, loving, high integrity wife, right? Saying no does not need to be a guilt-ridden experience in your marriage. You can in fact say no for your marriage in service to having a way better, more loving marriage. Okay? I think oftentimes for us, really like kind-hearted, loving, sensitive souls, being loving, this idea of being a loving person gets confused with saying yes or doing what other people want, specifically our husband, right? Or like not ruffling his feathers or quote unquote upsetting him, right? And what I want to make really clear today is that this is a big mix-up. And it's one that really hurts our own happiness, our partner's happiness ultimately, and our marriage's well-being in the long run. You can be loving, in fact, even more loving, by saying no and only doing what he wants you to when you yourself want to. You can love and still say things like, no, I can't do that right now. I don't want to do that with you. I don't want to go out tonight. Or like, I'm not going to do it the way you want me to. I'm not going to do it your way. I'm going to do it my way, right? Or no, I'm doing something else right now. Or I'm not going to stick around and stay near you when you do that thing. I won't stick around when you say such things. In other words, I love you and no. Okay? So I want to help define for us right now what loving actually is and what it isn't, right? Because again, we get this a little mixed up. So loving doesn't mean just being nice and sweet, right? And pleasing, right? I myself am not always nice and sweet. I am seriously loving though, right? Sweet is not synonymous with loving, right? Niceness, being nice to my partner, isn't a reflection of how much I love him and how much love I bring to our marriage. And that's true for you too. So I know it's kind of, for me, it's easy to forget this occasionally. And sometimes I will feel like momentarily bad when I'm just sort of matter of fact with my husband, or I don't respond sweetly to something he says or with a smile, or I might even feel kind of bad when I don't want to try or to be pleasing to him, right? Don't want to be sweet and kind. Because I do, in some deeper part of me, feel like I'm supposed to be, right? I think I should be sweet and kind. And what I mean by kind, I actually like to distinguish this a little bit. Nice. I think nice and sweet, right? I think kindness is actually a little different in the way I like to think about it. Kindness doesn't have to be sweet, if that makes sense. Just like love doesn't have to be sweet and pleasing, right? But back to my point, which is that like, I think as women, so if you have this experience too, like you kind of want to please him, or like you're afraid to not please him, in other words, or you feel like you need to be sweet and kind or sweet and nice all the time, right? That's coming from our conditioning as women, right? I mean, really, like if we think back to not so very long ago, women were like needed to be obedient and sweet and please our husbands, right? And if we didn't, it could mean terrible things. It could even mean death. I mean, think about like women who were burned at the stake for not being who men thought they should be, for not acting in a certain defined way that like men had decided we were supposed to act like, right? So now if it's scary to you, or if you feel guilty when you aren't being sweet and pleasing, when you're saying something that might ruffle his feathers, of course, right? Of course you are. Going against that was potentially death to women in the past. And we still carry some shreds of that fear in us, okay? But at the same time, we live in a very different time, a time when it's just, again, like truly ripe for a major change in the way we women show up in our relationships. And really like a revolution in the way we do love, that one that brings so much more love and respect and deep, true well-being to everybody involved. So the truth is, sweetness doesn't always serve that purpose, right? Even when I'm not sweet, when I'm not agreeable, even when I'm feeling more quiet or serious or more in my own shell, or even irritated or angry, or when I don't do what he would like me to do, what my husband would like me to do, guess what? I'm still loving. I'm still bringing love to us. I'm loving him deeply. And I have to remind myself of this, right? Because I always am. I know myself, despite all of this, to be a deeply good partner and wife, right? Just because I say, no, I don't want to do that, or even if I tell him that I don't like something that he's doing, that happens sometimes, I can still be so in integrity with my marriage vows, so on his side, so unconditionally loving, again, so for a loving culture in our marriage. In fact, more so because I'm being honest and true to myself, right? When I say, no, I don't want to do that. When we say yes, when we want to say no, when we smile brightly, when we feel like frowning, when we do what he wants at the expense of what we want to do, or at the expense of taking care of ourselves, that is not loving. That is what we call people pleasing. And people pleasing will not lead to the deeper, more genuine, solid, loving marriage you want. It will lead instead, really, to eventually having a huge wall of resentment there between you. So I have a lot more to say on people pleasing because so many of us highly sensitive people tend to do it unconsciously. And and it's not a problem. It comes from a really benevolent intention, right? But it does end up undermining us and how we feel and how, deeply and genuinely loving we can get with our partners. So I will be sharing more on this, more specifics on people pleasing and what to do about it and how to work with it in the future. But much of what I'm saying here today is about people pleasing and how to not do it. So I do want to kind of think about this more simply today, more specifically about how we go about coming to our relationships with this attitude of like, I can say no and it can be loving, right? So your job in your marriage, and this is really important, is not to babysit your husband's emotions at the expense of your own. Yeah. You can say no. You can walk away when he's doing something you don't like. You cannot accommodate him. You can let him have the feelings that he has when you do that and still love him so well and still have a culture of deep love and safety and connection in your marriage. Okay? So I want to illustrate this right now with a story of my own that happened not too long ago. Not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, my husband, actually, as I mentioned on the podcast before, was away for a 4-day bike packing trip. And it was a new thing for him. And he was so excited when he got home. He was just so enthusiastic about it. And he wanted to share his photos of it like right away with me. Now, to put this in context, I had been home for those 4 days with my 3 boys and working and balancing all of it on my own, right? So I was just tired by the time he got home. I was like ready to have some alone time. But he really wanted to share his pictures with me. And it was like 8:30 at night by the time like the little one was in bed. And I told him, I'm happy to look at the photos with you. I'd love to see them, but only for 10 minutes tonight. Okay? So even that was a form of saying, I love you, and no, I'm not going to look at it for a long time, right? So we sat down and he showed me his photos, and he was just like, he did all these videos of himself, and he was just explaining in detail all the things. 10 minutes like whizzed by, and he was only like a quarter of the way through his photos, maybe halfway through his photos. And there was no sign of him stopping anytime soon. So as I noticed that, and I didn't say anything, which was my bad, I started to feel like this icky emotion welling up, right? It was that weight that that we often feel, that's resentment, right? It was resentment and it was annoyance, right? So as I noticed that, it became really clear to me that I was only staying for him in an attempt to make him happy, right? I wasn't at that point, after the 10-minute mark, I wasn't doing it out of genuine interest and love at that moment. I wasn't doing it because I actually really wanted to. I was doing it because I thought I had to. I was clearly doing it only to people please him. That's a sign of people pleasing, is that we feel resentment and frustration when we're doing the thing. Okay. And that is not in loving integrity with who I want to be. I don't want to be smiling and nodding and saying, cool, neat, yeah, when I'm genuinely not feeling that way. Right? That really leads to seething and resentment under the surface, which is not good for either of us. Right? He's not getting the attention and genuine care he deserves, or that I want to give him and that he wants, right? When I'm stewing in that resentment and annoyance. And I'm not giving myself the care and attention I genuinely deserve, right? From myself by saying no, by saying, let's do this later, right? That is not the path to love. That is not loving, right? It's the path to duty and resentment and love feeling like a burdensome chore, right? And also, like we talked about last time, it's the path to feeling trampled. Like you don't matter more than a doormat, right? Because I wasn't mattering so much to myself. I was letting myself be a sort of doormatty behavior, right? And it's also a path to feeling like your marriage is a trap, right? When it's like a duty, a job, it feels like a trap. And it's one that we get our own selves into by mixing up what our job is as a wife and a partner, right? By trying to take on the job of tending to our husband's emotions, trying to keep him from feeling unhappy, keep him thinking highly of us, not letting him see who we really are and what's really good for us, not letting him hear the truth of what you genuinely want, right? We create that by just trying to please him when we don't really feel like actually deep down, that's what we want to be doing in the moment. So if you found yourself in this trap, I want to give you 4 steps or things to think about to help you get out of it. So the first one is kind of what I've been talking about already. It's a call to separate love from duty, sweetness, and being pleasing to him, right? In other words, separating how you think about love and knowing yourself as a loving human from how you think he wants you to behave, right? Being loving does not mean saying yes and being sweet at your own expense, right? Again, love is not synonymous with duty or sweetness. Right? Remember, this is what's called for here, to remember that you can be a great wife and partner who helps your marriage evolve and feel better and better for both of you, both you and your husband, because you say no and set limits and take care of you, yourself, right? Again, when you say yes, when you mean no, when you do something you really don't want to do, what happens is you'll feel grumpy and resentful, right? And this is kind of like giving your husband a pile of resentment without him actually choosing it. Like in that moment where you have the decision to be like, no, I don't want to do it, or just like sucking up and being sweet and smiley, or like doing what he wants. If he had the opportunity to choose which one for you, right? Even if he asked you to do something, he'd probably prefer your peace and happiness over you doing the thing he wants you to do, right? Like over you saying yes, over you tolerating doing that thing you don't want to do, over even like being around him when you really don't want to. But when you think that you have to please him in these ways to be a good wife, you don't give him that choice, right? So to illustrate this more clearly, like after my husband and I had this incident with the photos, which I'm going to tell you more about in a minute, like the end of it, later that night when we talked about it, I made it really clear that I could have stayed, which I didn't. And again, I'm going to tell you more about that, and sort of tolerated looking at these photos just to please him, but with a sense of palpable annoyance, like emanating from me, which he could feel, right? Or I could have pushed it off to another time when I genuinely wanted to and could feel happy to do so, right? And when we talked about it, he told me he totally preferred the second option. He wanted me to do it when I wanted to. He wanted my genuine happiness and interest in it, right? That was the experience he would have much preferred too, right? And of course, right, because the hubby, right, deep down, even if it's not always obvious to you, your husband wants your genuine happiness, not an annoyed, exhausted, duty-bound, resentful wife. I guarantee it. Right? He married you and he loves you after all, right? He loves you and you love him. Yeah? So showing your love does not mean taking actions you don't truly want to. Okay, so that's the sort of step number 1, or an understanding number 1 for you. The next step or understanding, in order to be able to say no from this loving place, really, is being honest with yourself when you really don't want to do something, right? or when something he does is something you won't tolerate or choose not to be around or get involved in. Like being honest with yourself, is that something you want around, you want to have happen? And you should be pretty good at this as a highly sensitive person because you're attuned to your feelings. So do check in with your feelings, how your body feels specifically, and it's going to tell you like whether you genuinely want to do this thing or not, right? Whether this is genuinely something that you choose or you're just doing it begrudgingly, okay? And then, of course, you say no or I can't, right? You say the words. You set the boundaries, whatever the thing is. Okay. And sometimes you might decide that you don't feel like doing the thing, but you actually genuinely want to for valid reasons. So all that I want to say about that right now is make sure if you do not feel like it, but you actually want to deep down, make sure you really like your reasons. An example that comes right to mind right now is I don't always feel like making my son's lunch for him to take to school with him. But of course I want to deep down because I want him to be fed. I want to be a mom who feeds my son and doesn't send him off to school to go hungry all day, right? I want to. And that's a reason that I really like for doing it. All right, so the third understanding or thing to do here is to trust your husband to do the job of his own emotion tending. Okay, when you say no or when you set a boundary, which we'll talk about in an upcoming episode, when you say, I don't want to go do that thing tonight, or no, I'm not going to look at the pictures with you, trust him to do the job of tending to his own emotions. He's a big boy, right? And he's got to find his own way with his own feelings. We women often say, I wish he was more of a grown-up, right? I wish he was more evolved and mature, right? I hear that all the time. You probably feel that way sometimes about your husband, right? So if we want that, then let's let him grow up, right? Let's let him evolve and learn how to work with his own feelings, learn how to work through his own feelings. Let's not take that job on ourselves. It is not your job to eliminate negative emotion from your hubby's life. It's not actually possible anyway. And it really is his own job, his jurisdiction, right? Whether he has negative feelings, and here's the thing, his feelings will come from his thoughts, okay? You might have thoughts about your actions, and he might have negative thoughts about your actions, or you say no, right? But they're not coming from you, okay? His negative feelings are coming from his thoughts, right? So it's his job to handle his own thoughts and deal with his own feelings, right? His emotion tending is his job. And the job of your emotion tending is yours, right? You are not doing that job for yourself if you're doing whatever he wants, helping whenever he asks, saying yes when you actually don't want to do any of it, right? When you're telling yourself you have to be a good wife, and it looks a certain way, or a good wife doesn't upset her partner, you're not doing your own job of emotion tending for yourself, right? And part of that emotion tending job for you might be to work through your own discomfort at his discomfort, right? If that's there for you, if you don't like it when he's upset, your job is to tend to your own emotions around that, right? So I created a whole podcast on this, I think it's in the 30s, about how to not be so upset when he's upset. So if this is an issue for you, totally go check that one out. It's a good one. So as you get better and better at tending to your own emotions, here's a cool thing, it will model to him how taking ownership of your feelings and working through them, how that works. Right? It'll trickle out and affect him. And truly, like, modeling is the best form of teaching. Yeah? So stay in your own jurisdiction, which is tending to your own emotions, not his. The fourth understanding or step is to trust him to love you even if you aren't always wanting to do what he wants. Trust that he knows your goodness and sees your beauty, right? And that his love is bigger than his small disappointment or frustrations with you. Trust that. This is so important, right? Trusting that is such a gift to you and to him, right? Both of these trust things, where you trust him to tend to his own emotions and you trust him to love you, it's such a gift, right? When you trust him like that, it's such a huge vote of respect. It sends the message that you trust him, that he's capable in your eyes, that he's trustworthy, that you see him as someone who's strong and fiercely loving and able to rise up in the face of challenges and disappointments and frustrations, right? As a human who can really, really love and be resilient, right? And when you send this kind of message, the cool thing is that people tend to rise up and meet our view of them. Yeah? When we see someone and we send that kind of message in this way, in this positive, trusting way, it brings out that part of them more. They start to see themselves that way and become more and more that person. So trusting him to love you and tend to his own feelings about you're not pleasing him or doing whatever he wants, this is also a gift to you, right? Because it allows you to stop feeling trapped and resentful and duty-bound, right? And instead, it allows you to care for yourself. It frees you up to be genuinely yourself, to do what's best for you. And it leads to a sense of security in your marriage that is palpable and deep and amazing, right? When you trust that your marriage and your partner are resilient like this and love you so much, that's beautiful. It gives such a depth of security to our marriages. So in my own example, the story, right, with the photos, once I started to feel that resentment bubbling up and I realized like, oh gosh, I do not want to be people pleasing here like this. I told him, I don't want to do this anymore. And to be honest, I was sort of still in the moment, so kind of enmeshed in my emotions. I didn't even say it in a great tone. I kind of let my frustration come through my voice. Right? Even though I totally recognized I was mostly frustrated at myself for letting the photo session keep going on, right? And the result was he did get mad. He was disappointed. He got mad. He even kind of flipped his lid a little, which was interesting for me in the moment. And he made it mean briefly that I don't care about him, right? He actually said that, like, you don't care about me. Now, even at the moment, I thought it was kind of funny, like in a cute way. Like it made me frustrated. I felt frustrated, but it was also kind of cute because it's like so human. Like that's where our lizard brain tends to go, right? When we're triggered emotionally, our brain loves to make things mean crazy things. Like she doesn't want to look at all my photos. That must mean she doesn't care. So when that started happening, I was like, I'm not gonna engage in this conversation right now. So another no, right? And I walked away so that we could both cool off and talk about it later. So once I walked away, I tended to my own feelings. And then I just kind of moved on. Like it wasn't that big a deal to me. I've worked on this kind of thing a lot. So it's easy for me to sort of move beyond it now. And I let him take care of his own feelings. And I did all of this with deep trust in our love, in each of our own capacities to tend to our emotions, right? I trusted especially that he'd find his way back to calm, to level-headedness, and to love. And later that night, like I mentioned a little bit earlier, we had a conversation, right, where it was made clear how much I love him, right, where I reminded him of that, and he reminded himself, right? And we talked about how, I'm not always going to do things just because he wants me to. And we both agreed that this is way better for us and our marriage as a whole, right? That we don't expect the other person to be doing pleasing things for us all the time as in an effort to prove our love for each other. That doesn't serve us. That isn't good for our marriage as a whole. right? And the result of this whole experience, as so often is the case when little things come up that are difficult, conflict comes up, is that he and I now have even more understanding and trust and love between us, right? So, to conclude, saying yes to your man when you really don't want to is saying no to yourself. And by extension, your own well-being and happiness and capacity to bring the fullness of your love, the fullness of your sensitive big heart to your marriage, right? It's not a good trade. In other words, saying yes to him or doing something to temporarily please him when you don't want to, or tolerating something you don't like tolerating, is ultimately saying no to having a healthy, loving marriage with him. It is not a win for either of you. So, my friend, if you aren't doing it already, start saying no. And understand what it really means when you say no is, I value our love so much that I will say no when that's right for me. In other words, it means I love you, so no. Be oh so well. Hey, if you sense you might have some work to do in this department and you want your marriage to feel a whole lot more respectful, a whole lot genuinely more loving, and not like a duty-bound experience where you feel a bunch of resentment, I invite you to come coach with me. It all starts with setting up your consult call to learn more and decide if that's a good next step for you. Head over to lifeisworthloving.com and click the Work With Me tab, and the drop down below that will be Get Started with a Call. I will also put the direct link to that in the show notes, but that page will share what you can expect on the call and what it will entail to coach with me, and the exact steps for setting up that complimentary consult call.